Today, I want to tell you how our goat market evolved from sale barn auctions to direct to consumer meat sales to something I stumbled into sort of by accident that turned out to be a much better fit for the goats we've been raising. There's a mental block I had to work through in there too, and I think a lot of producers run into the same one. Let's get to it. Hey there, welcome to GoatWise. I'm Millie Bradshaw, animal scientist and rancher. Here we talk meat goats, feeding strategies, goat fencing, and livestock management that holds up in real life. If you care about raising goats well and building systems that actually work, you're in the right place. Let's talk livestock. If this podcast has been useful, leave a review on Apple Podcasts. Scroll down to ratings and reviews, tap the stars, leave a few sentences. It helps more serious livestock producers find the show, and I read every one of them. Then go grab the free kidding due date chart at goatwise.com/kidding-chart. That also gets you on the insider email list, which is where I share extra things that aren't on the podcast. The link is in the show notes. Here's what's happening on the ranch. We got all of the goats collared with the virtual fence collars on Friday, and they are in training. I can't believe how fast they're learning. We only had escapes on the first day, and we haven't had any since. We're starting the training right here in the kidding pasture rather than behind electric netting after I had a conversation with a no-fence rep about how the goats learn the audio cues. I'll do a full update on the training process and how it's going once we have enough to actually report on. That episode is coming. Kidding is essentially done. One doe left. She's bagging up, just taking her time. 79 does have kidded, 151 live kids on the ground, and we've lost 5. That is an exceptional year, and I cannot wait to give you the full report once that last doe decides to release her hostages. Darcy had 2 goats in the local 4th of July parade, painted up with red, white, and blue stars, and a pack saddle full of candy. It was a great day and a great way to celebrate the 250th birthday of this country. All right, I want to talk about marketing goats today. Specifically, how our marketing evolved, what we tried, what didn't work, and what we figured out sort of by accident that turned out to be the best fit. This is not a roadmap, it's just our story, and I think there's something useful in it for anyone who's building a herd without a clear market plan yet. When we first got into commercial meat goats, and I'm only talking about the commercial meat goats here, not show goats, that is a completely different conversation. We took them out to Colorado to sell. The auction there is pretty good and mostly consistent, and we did really well for a few years. And then we had a bad year. We took our very best set of goats, the most we'd ever taken in one load, and it was just bad, really bad. Discouraging in a way that made me decide we needed to do something different, create a direct market for those goats, sell them ourselves, not hand them off at an auction and take whatever the ring gave us that day. At the time, I basically only considered one option, selling directly to the consumer for meat. I didn't even really think about anything else. And you know how sometimes you get on an idea and before you know it, it's snowballed into something much bigger than you planned? That's what happened. We built it out. We built a whole direct-to-consumer goat meat operation. We shipped. I learned a tremendous amount, and it was genuinely a good experience. But the profit margins were not what I needed them to be, and the further we got into it, the clearer that became. I want to be careful here because I don't want to say it wasn't viable. If that was where my passion lived, we would have made it work. We would have figured it out. But there's a reason goat meat is expensive. By the time you get an animal processed, get the right label on it, meet the regulatory requirements, do all of that, and then ship it, the cost stacks up fast. And when fuel prices went up, it ate most of the margin. Fuel affected dry ice costs, it affected shipping and shipping materials, it affected my cost to transport goats to the butcher and go pick up the meat. That was a 300-mile round trip every time for me. And I was at a point where I had too many things going on and I had to choose. So the meat operation didn't go away entirely, we've refocused it, but it was no longer going to be the main market for the goats we were raising. At the same time all of that was happening, the podcast had grown. People were listening, and they were listening to what we had going on genetics-wise. And some other markets started opening up on their own. I had a waitlist for the doe kids. I only got 2 people deep into the waitlist, and I was already sold out. The does were becoming easy to sell, and at this point, I can't raise enough of them. Good problem to have, right? We've worked hard over 8 years to build a goat that thrives with as little human input as possible. They kid unassisted. They mother well. They do what they're supposed to do without us engineering every step of the process. And people want that. Once you've bought a goat that can do that, you don't want to go back. But I still had the wethers, and that was the driver behind the direct-to-consumer meat side of things, a place to go with the wethers that we could control. This past season, after butchering for the meat business, I had 26 wethers left, and we went back and forth on whether we wanted to drive out to Colorado with a load that size, because we were crunched with fence work, timing, everything else happening at once, and I finally said, you know what? Let me just put them on the local classifieds. Let me see what happens. I didn't have the website set up to advertise them properly. I don't really do social media. I just popped them into the classifieds with a basic listing of their traits, and I started getting phone calls fast. What ended up happening was one of those things that could easily have not happened, but I'm so glad it did. Zach from Idaho Goat Grazers saw the ad. He does weed eating with goats, runs a grazing crew, and his friend who listens to the podcast told him who I was. We texted back and forth, and he bought all 26. And here's the thing I knew before talking with Zach. Those wethers are actually a perfect fit for a grazing operation. They've never had grain, they're trained behind electric netting, and they're going to grow like crazy eating whatever you put in front of them because that's exactly how they've been raised. You buy those wethers, take them out on weed-eating jobs, get paid for the jobs, and those goats are going to perform. They're not going to be your problem animals, they're going to behave behind the fence, and they're going to eat. Then, at the end of the season, you sell them into the meat market, and you're selling a heavier animal than what you bought. If the numbers work, and I think they do, that's a genuinely good business model. I just didn't think there was a legitimate market to sell them that way. I thought most goat grazing businesses were using only does. I texted Zach to check on the goats and asked if he could get me weights on those wethers at the end of the season. He told me they grew so fast that he had already sold them. His buyer wants a specific weight, and they hit their target weight early. He also said he's never had goats from an outside source do as well on the grazing crew as ours have. That was pretty cool to hear. My intuition was right. These goats are made for weed eating. I also want to mention Virgil from VS Goat Grazing, another producer up in Idaho doing great work in the weed eating space. He and Zach do a lot of grazing jobs together, so he's also had a chance to watch our goats work. Both of them are worth following if you're interested in what a successful goat grazing operation actually looks like. I'll drop their links in the show notes. Now, here's the part I want to talk about that I think a lot of people run into, especially if they've been in the cattle seed stock space. I had a mental block about the whole idea of being a seed stock producer. In cattle, seed stock producers are typically purebred. A lot of them are registered purebred, and we're not doing that. We've got a lot of crossbreds along with our Boer and Spanish goats. We're not registering anything. And somewhere in the back of my head was this idea that if you weren't in the registered purebred world, you weren't really a seed stock producer. You were just selling culls and extras. And I had to get past that. It took it being right in my face, watching the doe waitlist form, watching Zach's Weathers outperform everything else on his grazing crew, before I could see it clearly. Registered or not, performance is performance. The goat either does the job or it doesn't. Our goats are doing the job, and other people's operations are benefiting from that. That is what seed stock means. The paperwork is not the point. Maybe someday we'll have some registered animals in here. Maybe not. I'm not opposed to it, but right now I'm not even interested because the unregistered goats we're producing are performing. That's the thing that matters. What became clear through all of this is that it makes way more sense for us to be a livestock breeder and seller than a meat seller, at least right now. We're culling hard, we're keeping data, we're building does that will kid unassisted and mother their kids, and bucks that other producers can build a quality herd faster with. And the Weathers have a solid place in weed-eating herds. The goat we built for our own system, for our environment, our management, our land, turned out to be exactly what someone else needed for theirs. We just didn't know we were there yet until circumstances pushed us to find out sooner rather than later. Of course, we're still improving the herd, and that will never end, but I think we are finally at a point of herd expansion now that the major refining has been accomplished. And that expansion will allow us to provide breeding stock for so many more producers. There are markets out there that you may not have considered, or even be aware of, that would want the goat that you're building. As you cull heavily and get more consistent and develop the kind of animal that performs well in your system, somebody else is probably going to value that goat too. It might be a replacement doe buyer. It might be a grazing operation looking for reliable animals. It might be someone you've never thought of as your customer. Build the right goat first. The market has a way of finding you when you do. See you next week. Hey there. Thanks for listening today. If this episode was helpful, share it with another producer who's raising goats. And if you haven't already, leave a quick review on Apple Podcasts. It helps more serious livestock owners find the show. As always, this podcast is for educational purposes only and is not a substitute for veterinary advice. I'll see you next week here on GoatWise.